Imagine a funeral where the living are forced to join the dead, through fire, through sex, and through blood. In the year 923, a Muslim diplomat watched a ritual so disturbing it haunted him forever. What he saw wasn't legend, it was real. And it reveals how Viking power was built on dominance, humiliation, and ritual violence unlike anything you've heard before. Section 1. The year was 923 AD, and the winter roads of the Rus lands were a cruel ribbon of frozen earth. Karim ibn Rashid, a scholar and diplomat from the Abbasid Caliphate, had been sent northward with a caravan to deliver letters of trust to the rulers of the Volga Bulgars. His journey was meant to be political, perhaps even tedious. Instead, it became a journey that would carve itself into his mind like a wound that would never heal. Karim had expected harsh weather, foreign customs, and strange languages. What he had not expected was the spectacle that awaited him on the banks of the Volga River, the funeral of a northern war chief, a man the locals described as a conungar. Karim had heard whispers even in Baghdad about the northern raiders, men who sailed dragon-headed ships, who descended upon coasts like storms, who enslaved entire towns. Yet stories, no matter how bloody, could never prepare him for what he saw with his own eyes. The body of the dead chieftain lay upon a platform of wooden furs, his weapons spread about him. But the true horror came not from the corpse, but from the living. A young thrall, a girl barely past her childhood, had been chosen for what they called the passage. She was to accompany her master into the next life. Karim's interpreter explained this with a casual tone, as though describing a meal. Karim watched as the girl was paraded before the tribe. She was given drink after drink, her body swaying, her eyes dulling. Men stepped forward, each placing his hands on her shoulders, whispering words Karim could not understand. One man, his beard braided with tiny bones, leaned close, his voice carrying just enough for Karim to hear through the translator. "Tell your master that I gave him my strength through you." Then the men began to touch her, to claim her, one after the other, as though her body were no more than a vessel. The crowd did not avert their eyes. They cheered, they laughed, they treated the act as sacred theater. Karim felt bile rise in his throat. He had studied law, poetry, and the histories of empires, but nothing in his books prepared him for a people who used sexuality as both religion and weapon. And this was only the beginning. The girl would not survive the day. He could not turn away, yet every part of him wanted to flee. His hand trembled as he scribbled notes on parchment, recording what he swore the world must know, even if it haunted him forever. Section 2. The ceremony dragged on with a rhythm that seemed both chaotic and ritualized, as though every drunken shout and every cruel gesture carried ancient meaning. Karim's interpreter, a Bulgar merchant named Yusuf, leaned close and whispered explanations whenever Karim's expression grew pale. "The girl is not unlucky," Yusuf murmured, as though to reassure him. "She is honored. To die with her master means she becomes part of his glory." Karim turned sharply. "Honored?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "She is enslaved. She has no choice." Yusuf's face tightened. "Choice is not their way. Here, strength is everything. To resist is weakness. And weakness is worse than death." On the field, the girl was led to a tent of colored cloth, its frame built beside the looming funeral ship. One by one, warriors entered. From inside came muffled sounds, grunts, laughter, sometimes her own voice rising in a broken cry. Karim could not help but hear. He forced himself to write, his quill scratching against parchment, as though recording could give him distance. When the men emerged, their faces glistened with sweat, their mouths curling in grim satisfaction. The crowd cheered each exit, treating the ordeal like a contest of endurance. Some spat on the ground in symbolic dismissal, as if to say they had poured their essence into her and needed nothing more. Then an old woman approached, the one they called the seer. Her face was lined like carved wood, her eyes sharp as blades. Around her waist hung a pouch of herbs, bones, and strange charms. She took the girl's hand and spoke words Karim's ears could not catch, though the tone chilled him more than the wind ever could. Yusuf explained. That is the Lady of Shadows. She prepares the girl for death. Soon she will give her to the fire. The seer poured thick mead down the girl's throat until she coughed, choking and sputtering. The crowd roared in approval. A warrior leaned close to Karim and barked something in his guttural tongue. Yusuf translated quickly. He says, she is already half in the afterworld. Tonight she will walk fully into it. The girl's eyes rolled unfocused. For a heartbeat, Karim thought she looked at him, really looked at him, as though begging silently. His fingers froze on the page. He wanted to intervene, to shout, to declare that this was no honor but murder. But he was a stranger here, a guest. Any outburst would mean his own death. And so he remained silent. His only weapon was ink, and his only act of resistance was to remember every detail. Section 3. As the sun dipped behind the treeline, shadows stretched long across the snow. The air carried the smell of pine resin, smoke, and the sweat of hundreds gathered to witness the spectacle. The chieftain's body had been moved to the funeral ship, resting on silks and wolf pelts, surrounded by his weapons, swords, axes, and a great shield painted with spirals of red and black. The girl, now heavily drugged, stumbled as she was led forward by two warriors. Her arms dangled, her feet dragging against the frozen ground. Yet the crowd parted with reverence, as if escorting a bride to her wedding. Karim's stomach twisted at the comparison. The seer raised her voice in a chant, the words strange and rasping. Yusuf leaned in again. She calls on the gods to open the gates of their hall. She says the girl carries the seed of the living into the land of the dead. The people repeated the chant, their voices rising like a storm. Some beat their shields in rhythm, others clapped, creating a pounding chorus that rattled Karim's chest. The girl was lifted onto the ship, placed beside the corpse of her master. Her head lolled against his shoulder as if she were already gone. Then came the final act. 6 men climbed aboard. Each of them knelt by her, performing one last ritual, touching her hair, her face, or her trembling hands. But it did not end with gestures. The old woman urged them on with shrill commands. Karim could not look for long. He lowered his eyes, hearing the sounds, the gasps, the shouts of the crowd that turned the moment into a performance. At last, the seer stepped forward. She pulled a rope from her pouch and looped it around the girl's neck. The girl stirred, her lips moving, perhaps whispering a prayer. Karim strained to hear, but the roar of voices drowned her words. With a sudden jerk, the rope tightened. The girl convulsed once, twice. Simultaneously, the seer drove a dagger between her ribs. The scream that left her throat was short and sharp, quickly silenced. The crowd erupted in triumph. To them, this was victory, assurance, transcendence. To Karim, it was horror beyond words. He pressed his sleeve against his mouth to keep from crying out. His notes blurred as tears burned his eyes. The ship was set alight. Flames licked up the masts, catching the furs, the weapons, the bodies. Smoke billowed into the sky, carrying with it the belief that the chieftain and the girl would ride into another world together. The people danced around the fire, their joy grotesque against the backdrop of death. Karim turned away, whispering to himself, "If the world does not know of this, it will happen again and again, forgotten and unchallenged." He swore then to right everything, no matter how unbearable. Section 4. That night, long after the fire's glow had faded into embers and the tribe had staggered away drunk on mead and ritual, Karim sat in his tent, unable to sleep. His mind replayed the girl's final gaze, the tightening rope, the roar of approval. He dipped his pen once more, desperate to trap the memory before it dissolved into nightmare. His notes shifted from description to analysis. He wrote, "Here, intimacy is not private. It is the stage upon which honor and power are displayed. To dominate is to live. To submit is to be cast into shadow." The next days, Karim learned more of the laws and customs of these northerners. Yusuf explained patiently, though with unease, as though speaking too much about such things might summon misfortune. Among them, Yusuf said, the worst insult a man can suffer is to be called Argar. It means weak, unmanly, passive. If you accuse a man of this, he may kill you without punishment. The law itself allows it. Karim raised an eyebrow. So a single word can be worth a life? Yusuf nodded grimly. Worse than theft. Worse than striking one's kin. To say a man is unmanly is to strip him of honor, and honor is all they have. Karim soon saw how deeply this cut into their society. Around the fires at night, warriors traded insults, testing one another like duelists with words instead of blades. Some of these taunts were about lineage, some about bravery, but the sharpest, most dangerous, were about sexuality. To even suggest that a man had played the passive role in bed was enough to start a blood feud. One evening, Karim overheard two men trading such barbs. He did not understand the words, but he saw their hands grip axe handles, their faces pale with fury. It was only the intervention of an elder, who stepped between them with a raised hand, that stopped blood from spilling then and there. Later, Yusuf translated the quarrel. One accused the other of lying beneath his wife like a woman. It is an image that marks him as unfit to lead, unfit even to carry arms. Had they fought, it would have ended with death. Karim shook his head in disbelief. In my land, such quarrels are foolish. Here they are deadly. Yusuf's voice dropped. Do not laugh at it, Karim. Their law courts have judged men guilty for such things. A whisper, a rumor, can ruin a family. I have seen a man stripped of property, cast from his home, because someone claimed he was soft in bed. Karim shivered. To him, intimacy was the most private of matters. To these people, it was the very measure of a man's worth, a scale upon which his life and legacy balanced. Section 5. The more Karim listened, the more he realized that the North was a land where a whispered insult could ignite a war. Around their hearths, the people told stories, sagas, that carried both entertainment and warning. Yusuf translated one for Karim late one evening as snow pounded the hide walls of their shelter. There was a man named Torvald. Yusuf began, his voice low and rhythmic, almost like a chant. He was mocked by his rival, who claimed Torvald had lain beneath another man. That word, arger, spread like fire through their settlement. Torvald demanded blood to wash away the shame. In the fight that followed, more than a dozen men fell, though the insult had been against one. The saga says, the tongue's wound is deeper than the axe's bite. Karim scratched the words onto his parchment. He thought of Baghdad's courts, where clever poets could duel with verse and walk away alive. Here, wit was as lethal as steel. Another tale told of a woman named Halfred. She despised her husband and, during a feast, rose before the guests and declared he was no true man in the bedchamber. Her words stripped him of honor more thoroughly than any blade could. Within months, his kin abandoned him, his wealth vanished, and his enemies carved him into a cautionary tale. Karim asked, "And what became of the woman?" Yusuf gave a bitter smile. She remarried. To a wealthier man. It struck Karim as strange, even terrifying, that women here wielded words as weapons sharper than swords. A wife could destroy her husband standing with a single accusation. Men, in turn, lived in constant fear, not only of defeat in battle, but of being branded weak in the only arena that mattered, the bed. The pattern emerged clearly in Karim's notes. Aggression fed on aggression. A man questioned in his masculinity answered with violence to restore his name. That violence begot feuds, feuds begot blood, and blood begot sagas sung by poets who ensured that humiliation endured for generations. One saga recounted how two warriors traveled across mountains and rivers for the sole purpose of killing a man who had once called them soft. The insult was years old, yet it burned hotter than any wound. When the victim begged for peace, they answered with spears, declaring, "Better to die with manhood intact than live with shame upon our names." Karim stared into the fire as Yusuf finished the story. He whispered, almost to himself, "These people build their world on blades and beds. To fall in either is to be unmade." Section 6. Karim's horror deepened when he began to understand that this obsession with dominance did not stop at words or quarrels within a family. It extended outward into war itself. To the northern raiders, victory was not only about killing, it was about stripping an enemy of honor in ways that would last long after death. Yusuf described to him a practice known among the warriors as scambahog, the change stroke. When an enemy was defeated, sometimes they were not killed outright. Instead, a blade was drawn across the buttocks or thighs in a symbolic cut. The meaning was unmistakable. The man had been penetrated, made passive, unmanned. They believe, Yusuf said grimly, that such a wound brands the soul itself. Even if the man survives, he cannot return home with honor. His people will see the scar and know he has been conquered in the worst way. Karim's pen nearly tore the parchment as he wrote. This was cruelty not for death's sake, but for permanence. Violence that lingered long after the blood dried. But the Vikings did not always stop with symbolism. Prisoners, especially leaders or kings, were sometimes forced into acts of submission before an audience. One saga Karim heard from the skalds told of a captured lord made to kneel in chains while warriors jeered and assaulted him, declaring that his strength now flowed into their own bodies. The man, once proud and feared, was reduced to nothing, his authority shattered. Karim could not help but ask Yusuf, "And when such men are released, if they are released, what becomes of them?" Yusuf shook his head. "Release is worse than death. A violated man is no longer a man. His people may drive him out. Some kill themselves. Others wander until the cold claims them. Better to fall in battle than live marked forever." Karim stared at the fire, his chest tightening. These rituals revealed a brutal logic. Death removed an enemy's body, but humiliation destroyed his spirit, ensuring he would never rise again, not in life, not in song. For the raiders, this was conquest perfected. A blade killed a man. Shame killed his legacy. Section 7. The farther Karim traveled with the Rus caravan, the more he learned of the vast machinery that sustained this culture of conquest. Violence did not end on the battlefield. It continued in the markets, where human beings were bought and sold as though they were livestock. At a trading post along the Volga, he saw it with his own eyes. Dozens of captives, men, women, even children, were corralled behind crude wooden fences. Their clothing was ragged, their faces hollow. Warriors moved among them, prodding, inspecting, laughing. To Karim's horror, the buyers were not only merchants but also local chiefs, their eyes appraising the captives with the same calculation they would show for a horse or a sword. Yusuf explained in a low voice. "The strongest men they send east, to labor in the fields of the Bulgars or beyond. The prettiest women they keep for themselves. Those of lesser beauty are traded like coins." One man, a grizzled warrior with scars across his cheeks, lifted a girl's chin roughly, turning her face toward the light. "She will do," he barked, tossing a pouch of silver to the slaver. The girl's mother, chained beside her, cried out. A guard struck her across the face to silence her. Karim's hand trembled as he wrote. "Here intimacy is not born of love but of ownership. A woman is property, measured in weight of silver. Her body is a tool of pleasure and a mark of status." The sagas Karim collected told of leaders who kept whole harems of captives. One tale described Jarl Sigbrand, who claimed he owned more Irish women than he had sheep. To his followers, this was not shameful but praiseworthy, proof of his power. The laws revealed the same brutal divide. Freeborn women, especially those of good families, were protected by harsh penalties against assault, sometimes even death. But enslaved women? They were not considered women in the eyes of the law at all. To force oneself upon them was not a crime of violation, but of property damage, no different than breaking a man's cart or killing his dog. Karim wrote furiously, shaking his head. "A people can claim to honor women while at the same time destroying them. Their honor is reserved only for the free. Their cruelty is poured upon the bound." What chilled him most was Yusuf's next words. "Many towns do not resist when raiders come. They have heard the stories. They surrender rather than let their daughters be taken. The threat itself is a weapon, sharper than any axe. Karim realized then that the raiders had mastered a form of psychological warfare as potent as steel. The mere idea of what they might do was enough to win battles before they began. Section 8. If the cruelty of slavery revealed how little choice mattered in this society, the customs of marriage revealed how even love itself was buried beneath law and spectacle. Karim witnessed a wedding feast in a settlement near the river Oka. The event was grand, longhouses filled with smoke from roasting boar, horns of mead raised high, warriors pounding on tables as skalds sang verses of lineage and honor. Yet beneath the music and laughter, Karim sensed something strange. For the true moment of marriage was not the feasting or the vows, but what came afterward. The bride, veiled and trembling, sat beside the groom while her family surrounded them. At the height of the feast, the officiant placed a heavy hammer across her lap, a symbol of the thunder god, meant to bless her with fertility. The crowd erupted in cheer, some of the men making crude jokes, others chanting blessings that were little more than thinly veiled references to the wedding bed. Then came the part that made Karim's blood run cold. The groom stood, lifted the bride's crown from her head, and held it aloft before the assembly. "She is mine," he declared. The gesture was more than symbolic. It was legal proof that the marriage would soon be consummated. The families then escorted the couple to the bridal chamber. Karim, though not permitted to enter, could hear the crowd waiting just outside, murmuring, some even laughing. Yusuf explained the grim truth. It is their law that the union must be witnessed in some form. If no one can swear it was fulfilled, the family of the bride may demand their dowry back. Karim stared at him in disbelief. You mean they watch? Yusuf nodded. Sometimes. More often they listen. The sounds from within are enough. In some places, a relative even stays in the room. It is not about love. It is about contracts, inheritance, proof. When the couple emerged the next morning, their bedclothes, stained with blood, were displayed for all to see. The bride's mother lifted the sheet high before the guests, announcing her daughter's purity had been proven. The cloth was carefully folded and kept, like a legal deed, for use in future disputes. Karim's stomach nodded as he recorded the scene. Here, the most private of acts is made public. A woman's body is not her own, but evidence in a case of property. The family listens as though to testimony, the sheet serves as parchment, the witnesses as judges. In their world, even love must stand trial. It struck him that the people around him did not find this cruel or strange. To them, it was simply the way of things, as natural as the rising sun. Section 9. Days later, as Karim's caravan prepared to move northward, he was invited, or rather compelled, to witness another chieftain's funeral. Though he wished desperately to refuse, he knew he could not. To decline such an event was an insult could easily become a death sentence. This funeral was even more elaborate than the first. The body of the war leader, a man named Hrothgar by the locals, lay upon a bier carved with runes. His ship, half buried in the earth, had been decorated with banners and garlands of pine. Beside the bier stood 3 young slave girls, each trembling as the warriors circled them, shouting, laughing, drinking. The custom was the same. One girl would volunteer to accompany her master to the other world. Of course, the word volunteer was a hollow thing. The choice was forced by expectation, by fear, by the hands of the seer, an old woman wrapped in black furs, her eyes gleaming like coals. The people called her Skuggamir, the mother of shadows. Karim watched in horror as the seer moved among the girls, muttering incantations. Finally, she seized the wrist of the youngest, a girl with pale hair and frightened eyes. The crowd cheered as though a bride had been chosen. For 3 days the girl was given drink after drink, herbs to cloud her mind, and a strange brew that left her dazed and staggering. Men came to her, one after another, whispering words into her ear before taking her body. Karim forced himself to write their words as Yusuf translated. Tell your master that I gave him my courage. Tell him that I gave him my strength. Tell him that I gave him my seed. It was not passion, not intimacy, but transfer, a grotesque belief that their essence flowed through the girl into the dead man, arming him for the afterlife. On the final day, she was led into the ship. 6 warriors entered with her, their faces solemn, as though performing a sacred rite. When they emerged, the seer strode forward with her cord and her knife. Kareem's heart pounded, remembering the last time. He could not look, yet he could not close his ears to the sound, the quick cry, the thud of a body collapsing, the roar of triumph. The girl was laid beside her master. Oil was poured across the deck. Torches touched the timbers. Flames leapt high, carrying both bodies into smoke and ash. Kareem's pen scratched furiously. They believe life itself can be moved like water, carried in the body of a girl to fuel the journey of a corpse. In this, they sanctify violation as holy work. Their cruelty is not random, it is system, doctrine, ritual. He stared into the rising smoke and whispered a prayer of his own, that God might blot from his memory the sound of that child's final breath. Section 10, Conclusion. As the caravan pressed onward, Kareem carried more than trade goods and parchment. He carried the weight of a truth that few in his homeland could imagine. The northerners were not simple barbarians, as so many whispered in the markets of Baghdad. They were something more unsettling, a people who had built an entire order of life, law, and belief around the blending of sex and violence. He had seen how insults about masculinity could spill as much blood as steel. How humiliation was sharpened into a weapon of war, leaving men alive but destroyed. He had witnessed markets where women were measured like coin, marriages where intimacy was reduced to contract, funerals where ritual death was dressed in sacred words. What haunted him most was the paradox. Freeborn women, daughters of chieftains, wives of warriors, possess rights unknown in much of the world. They could divorce, inherit, even rule estates. Yet enslaved women were stripped of all humanity, their bodies made into offerings, proof, or punishment. The freedom of the few rested on the ruin of the many. Kareem wrote in his final notes, "In their world, a man's worth is measured by his power to dominate. A woman's fate depends on whether she is free or bound. Their gods are fed with blood, their laws with fear. To them, cruelty is not shameful but sacred. They do not separate pleasure from pain, nor love from violence. All are tools in the keeping of order. This is their strength, and their sickness." As he left the northern lands, the smoke of burning ships fading behind him, Kareem swore he would tell the world what he had seen. He knew many would not believe him. Some would dismiss his words as exaggeration, others as enemy slander. But he had seen too much to remain silent. And so his parchment filled, line by line, with the story of a people who turned intimacy into theater, dominance into religion, and death into spectacle. A people who would leave their mark on Europe not only through their raids and swords, but through their very ideas of what it meant to rule, to live, and to be a man. For Kareem, the memory would never fade. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the fire, heard the chant, and felt the weight of a world where cruelty wore the mask of honor. He prayed the world might one day remember the girl's face, not the chieftain's name.